During World War II, the Nazi regime invented many weapons and vehicles called Wunderwaffe, or Wonder Weapons, which will be touched on later in the episode. One of which was the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. You've probably never heard of it, so I'm going to tell you about it, and some stories of the people affiliated with the comet. My name is History Nerd Sam, and welcome to Forgotten Histories. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was a rocket-powered plane designed to attack Allied bombers quickly before darting off. Originally designed in the 1930s by Helmuth Walter, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was a one-manned rocket plane armed with two 30mm Mk-108 cannons, and was able to reach around 559 to 624 miles per hour, where normal fighters at the time rarely exceeded 350 miles per hour. However, it was an unreliable aircraft, especially since it only had about 3 to 8 minutes of fuel. It was dangerous not only to the pilots, but to the engineers who had the job of fueling the plane, which I will add upon later. The pilots faced many challenges when flying, such as the G-forces from the over 3,300 pounds of thrust produced by its Walter HWK rocket engine. When flying, they only had about 3.5 seconds, if they were lucky, to aim and fire upon their targets, which, as you may guess, proved very difficult. Landing was especially difficult. One source nicknamed the Messerschmitt the Devil's Sled. This was because of the landing gear, or the lack thereof. When taking off, the Messerschmitt shed a small trolley used for stability when taking off. Afterwards, the only thing that the pilots to land on was a metal skid plate that looked like 2 pair of snow skis. These often failed to extend like they were supposed to, leading to numerous back injuries. Upon landing, the plane was also prone to overturning when the pilots were forced to land on soft ground. However, the challenges originally started when they were still testing. During a test flight, an experienced test pilot named, sorry in advance if I mispronounced this name, Heine Dittmar, was injured during a test flight in 1941. He was badly injured and knocked out of the game for around a year because of damage to his spine. Another test pilot was, once again forgive me in advance, a woman named Hannah Reicht. She was a civilian test pilot flight captain who received the highlight of her career in October of 1942 when she was given the chance to test the comet. During an unpowered test flight, more of a glide, after a malfunction with the takeoff trolley, she had tried to shake it off with the differing G-forces but couldn't. Instead of bailing out, like was standard protocol you were supposed to do, she decided to land the plane and nearly succeeded. But at the last minute, the engine stalled and she crashed into a field with severe injuries. Her skull and multiple bones were fractured, and her nose was nearly ripped off. One version of the story states, quote, Hannah opened the cockpit canopy and soon noticed she was bleeding from her nose. It turned out that it had been completely severed off. Always a conscientious test pilot, she grabbed her notepad and scribbled down what happened, then covered her face with a handkerchief to not shock her rescues. End quote. Sometime after the crash, she received the Iron Cross First Class for her courage. Despite it being a military honor and her being a civilian test pilot, she was the first German woman to receive this honor. The Messerschmitt was propelled with a volatile concoction of sea stuff, which is a combination of methanol and hydrazine hydrate, and another mixture that was injected into the engine to produce combustion and thus thrust, T-stuff, as it was called, was a hydrogen peroxide-based chemical that when injected into sea stuff would oxidize and produce the power needed to reach high altitudes and speeds. These chemicals were highly corrosive, toxic, and deadly when mixed. Wonderful mix, of course. The fuel combination was not only combustible when mixed, but when it came in contact with any organic materials as well, such as a pilot. One source says that some pilots were even dissolved in fuel-related incidents. Ouch. The pilots and engineers wore special suits made of non-organic materials. When fueling the plane, there were two separate trucks of C stuff and T stuff. As you can probably guess, it wouldn't be smart to put them in the same truck, even if it had two different tanks, just in case of a spill. In short, however, the Messerschmitt effectively controlled the explosion produced by C stuff and T stuff to produce thrust and liftoff. In the end, the Messerschmitt ME-163 Comet was nothing short of a failure, despite being called one of the Nazi regime's Wunderwaffe or wonder weapons. Overall, these planes were created at the start of World War II and were still being tested late into 1942, with only 279 being operational. That's not many in Nazi Germany standards. At the end of the war, there were only 3 active groups of Messerschmitts. The main one that saw combat was Comet Group, please forgive me, German words are long and hard to pronounce, Jagdgeschwader or Fighter Wing 400, which saw very little combat. When they did see combat, they proved very challenging to those who fought against them. Allied bombers often waited until the Messerschmitt ran out of fuel before attacking, which is probably the best strategy. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Forgotten Histories. I hope you enjoyed this and hope you will stick around for the rest of Season 1. I have a wonderful season full of exciting tales from conflicts from multiple reaches of history. I found the story of the Messerschmitt ME-163 Comet very interesting. Frankly, I stumbled upon it by accident, and hopefully you did as well, I guess. Or your friends told you about it and referred you to me. These episodes should become quite a bit longer depending on how interesting I find the stories or if they have a lot of things to tell about. If you did enjoy, please feel free to hang around. It's going to be very exciting and I'm going to be reading a historical book at the end of Season 1. This season is going to be talking about many things from the entire history of the country of Andorra to the battles of World War II, as well as the runners, a very dangerous job in World War I and prior to that. At the end of Season 1, we are going to be reading The Guns of the Gods by Talbot Mundy, so stick around. It's going to be a fun one. Feel free to go to Compass Studios YouTube to check out all the other different podcasts, from Mentally Positive, where we do a lot of book reviews, to Waypoint Games, where we're going to be doing a lot of video game stuff, and Deception Talks if you really like SCP lore, creepy stuff like that. Once again, thank you so much for listening. My name is History Nerd Sam, and I will see you in the next one.